Hey, it's Justin. In this series, we are going to be integrating FastAPI with Airtable. Now, recently, I was working on a project and I really wanted that project to get up quickly, and I wanted to store data from potential customers or potential users of that service. And to do this, I used FastAPI and Airtable, and I thought it was actually a really good series because FastAPI is a micro Python framework. It's really easy to deploy it really quickly. You don't have all the overhead like you might with a Django project. And then Airtable is also really cool because it's kind of like a modern version of Google Sheets. Now, Airtable's not sponsoring this. I just really like their platform. So we're going to go ahead and use that one. Now, this is not meant to be a beginner introduction to integrating Python with Airtable. If you want to see that one, check the link in the description. But for everyone else, let's go ahead and see exactly what we'll be building. So here's an example of the actual landing page we're building. It's incredibly simple on purpose, but the main thing here is being able to actually collect a user's email and then send it into the Airtable database, which we could do all sorts of cool stuff with. That's kind of the main thing here. And again, this is minimal, so it's not really a lot of overhead on how to get this going. And even if you just know a little bit about Python, you can probably execute this pretty well. Let's go ahead and set up our project. In this case, I already have a directory or folder created specifically for this project called FastAPI-Airtable. There's nothing in it currently, and I need to actually create my virtual environment. So I'm going to be using Python 3.6, and of course I'll use the venv module, which is built into Python 3.6, and I'll go ahead and activate this. So if you've never done this before, check out the link below if you're new to Python or this method of Python to see how we install things. So here we go. We started the environment. We activated it. If you're on Windows, just a reminder, it's /script/activate. And this is just another way to manage a virtual environment. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and touch requirements.txt. That's just a quick way to create that. Windows users, you might have to do echo and requirements.txt. Those are essentially the same thing. So this actually just creates an empty requirements file in which we need to fill up right now. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this directory, and I'll open it into my text editor, which in this case I'm using VS Code. Feel free to use whatever text editor you'd like for this. It's completely up to you. I just like VS Code for a lot of reasons. I will be using VS Code for the remainder of this. So let's go ahead and do FastAPI-Airtable as the code workspace as I saved it. And inside of requirements, we're going to get all of our requirements here. First off, FastAPI. No surprise here, probably. So FastAPI between these two versions, right? So between 0.63.0, this is a cool way to do that in a requirements file. Now, I think that's the only one that actually needs to be in between here, because if a new version comes out, perhaps it breaks a lot of these things. But by all means, try out newer versions. It's completely up to you. Next is Jinja, then Python multipart. This is so our forms can actually work. These are arranged the wrong way. Python.env is to read our .env file, which we'll set up soon. And Python requests and uviacorn. All of these things are the minimal that we'll need to get this going. So I'm going to open up the terminal inside of VS Code with Control-tilde, and that also works on Windows, and then it will activate the virtual environment yet again. Of course, you can be using terminal directly. A lot of times terminal is actually faster than VS Code using terminal outside of VS Code. So just keep that in mind if you're getting some lag in VS Code. That's actually true for me at least. So I'm going to go ahead and do pip install-r requirements.txt. Now, this is actually how I start my virtual environments when I'm developing not for classes. The reason being that my requirements.txt file actually helps me map out what I'm going to do specifically, but also I know for sure then that when I deploy this into a production server, I have all of the things I needed in requirements.txt. So just a little pro tip there for you. So let's go ahead and do pip install-upgrade and pip. Cool. So now we have our primary project set up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and create our first FastAPI module. It's going to be really simple. We're going to make an src folder for our source. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead and do app.py. Okay, so it's often called app.py. Sometimes it will be main.py. But no matter what it is, this is where we're going to declare our FastAPI app instance. So to do this, it's really simple. So from FastAPI, we're going to import the FastAPI class, and we're going to declare app equals to FastAPI. And we want to initialize that. So there you go. That is simply a FastAPI app. Now all we need are routes and functions to actually handle those routes. Now, what do I mean by a route? Well, if I go to HTTP localhost and let's say the port of 3000 and then ABC, /ABC is our route. This is also known as a path. Okay, so this part, the localhost part, that would be your custom domain, whatever that might be. And the actual port itself is actually more concerned on the server side, not so much the domain that you end up using. So like your live domain might be https www.myawesomesite.com ABC, right? So it might end up being like that. So that means we need to define our first route. It's really simple. It's just @app. So at the app dot get and then that /sign. So I want the main index page. I don't need ABC. You can type out ABC here, of course, but I want the main home page. And I call this a home view, right? So I define a function in here to handle this page. And in this case, I'll call it a home view. And what this is going to return is just a dictionary, just a standard old Python dictionary. It needs to be able to be JSON encoded, which I'll show you that in a moment. But I'll go ahead and say hello and :world. And that's it. That's a minimal FastAPI application. Give yourself a hand if you've never made a FastAPI app, because it really is that simple. You can make this asynchronous as well by just putting async in front. If I spell it correctly, that actually is now an asynchronous view. Give yourself a hand if you've never done an asynchronous view. So that's pretty simple. Now, when I said this has to be JSON encoded, what do I mean by that? Well, if I come into just regular Python and I grab my data here and just say data equals to that dictionary, and if I import JSON, not John's, but JSON, I can do JSON.dumps of that data. If you get an error here, that means it's not able to be JSON encoded. There's a lot of ways to fix that, but just generally speaking, you want to make it able to do something like this. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, we have to actually try and run this application. So to run it, what I'm going to do is uviacorn and then src.app:app --reload. I'll explain all of these in just a second. If I hit enter, it actually runs a server here, right? It runs it on, this is my local host, right? That's the local host for every machine. So every time you're on a machine, you're running a local host, it's most likely going to run right there. It might be 0.0.0.0, but more often than not, it's 127.0.0.1. 8000 is the port. That is the default port. If you want to change that, you can just do --port and 3000, and that actually changes it with uviacorn. So this reload thing is pretty cool, because if I ever save anything inside of app.py, it will automatically update it. Pretty cool. As in, it will restart the application itself. So if we go to this URL, whatever it ends up being, with whatever port that is, we now see that hello world coming back. Nice and simple. See, if you're like me, you forget commands like this from, well, all the time. So I definitely do. So I like to make it as easy on myself as possible by creating a new folder in here, and I call this scripts. So inside here, I create something called run.sh, and I literally paste that in there. This is meant for your reference, but also meant for you to just get in the habit of creating stuff like run.sh. You might call it local.sh as well, but run.sh works fine. So what's src? Well, of course, it's this folder here, and then it looks inside of src for the app.py, and then inside of app, it's looking for the declaration of app. So if you actually called this application, you would need to update this right there, as well as that. So all three places. but I like keeping it in as app. That's how they use it in the documentation. That's how we should use it as well. If you're on Windows, you need to do run.ps1. Otherwise, this should work. If for some reason UVicorn is not working, check out a package called Waitress. This should work as well in a very, very similar fashion as what we've got here. But I believe UVicorn does work on Windows. Anyways, so let's go ahead and do chomod plus x and scripts/run.sh. If you're on Windows, you don't need to do that. But if you're on Mac and Linux, you do. This is just allowing it to be executable. And we run that, and now it's actually running. So that's actually how I set up pretty much every project that I use, whether or not it's using FastAPI. I just like to remember this run thing. Pretty cool. Now, FastAPI is primarily an API service, meaning it's usually going to be returning JSON data. That's its primary function, but not always, and it doesn't have to do that. In fact, it can use Jinja Templates. Now, if you've never used these before, but you've used maybe Django templates or even Shopify's Liquid, there's a lot of features that overlap between all of these things for templates. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now, remember, I already installed Jinja when we first did our requirements, so I can use it already. We're going to go ahead and do from FastAPI.templating. We're going to import Jinja to templates. Okay, so I want to declare a templates directory, and I'm going to put this inside of my src folder here. So we'll go ahead and do templates, and inside of here, I'm going to make base.html. Okay, so before I go much further with base.html, let's go ahead and actually declare this location. So to do this, we import something called pathlib. So import pathlib. And I want to set my base directory. So base dir equals to pathlib.path of this file. So what's the path of this file? That's exactly what this would do. And then if you do .parent, this is actually going to be the src folder. And that's true from wherever we call this file, right? So it's going to give me this absolute path, and then the parent it's actually in, which would allow me to use something like templates in just a moment. Now, this is also important cross-platform, right? So if I sent you this code and you ran it, this will actually work on your system as well, which is important when we go into production. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and now declare where my templates are, and it's simply templates equals to the Jinja2 templates right here. Oops, not Jinga, but Jinja2 templates. And we give the directory, and this of course is going to be our base dir/templates. This is the coolest thing about pathlib if you're not already aware. This is how you can combine, and this actually gets me to the directory of where templates are, that actual folder. So what's going to happen is when we actually render out one of these templates, it's going to look inside of this directory for that template. So this home view now, I actually no longer want it to render this. Instead, what I want it to do is render templates, so templates.template response, and I want it to render home.html. And I actually need to pass in a little bit of context. That context starts with the request itself. So that is request.get and all of the things that may come in with that request. Now, something that's a little interesting about FastAPI versus some of these other frameworks is you actually pass in the request here and the declaration of the class. So see this colon here? This is going to make it of that class. And we pass this in to our templates. So request being to that request. Okay. So now that we've got this, we actually want to fill out our base.html. I'm going to do this by using Bootstrap, getbootstrap.com. This is just an incredibly easy way to do it. We go into docs, and inside of docs, we will find a quick start area, and more specifically, a starter template. So I'll go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste it into base.html. The commented out code here we don't need. That may not be there any longer when you actually come on here. But now I've got this hello world, and I'll call this hello FastAPI Airtable. Okay, and again, FastAPI times Airtable. Cool. Okay, so now let's make sure this server is running with /scripts run.sh or ps1, or again, if you forgot, it's really simply, it's just uviacorn and then the location where app.py is, and then the actual FastAPI class instance, which was this. Cool. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and open this up, and I get an internal server error. I'm getting template not found. Cool. Well, of course the template's not found. Home.html is there, but base.html is there, right? So to change this, what I actually want to do is inside of base.html, I'm going to cut this out and do block content. Notice that I have a curly bracket and %, and then block. Block is definitely what you want to name it. The variable, or whatever you want to call this, content, you can call it, and then end block. It's a very, very common syntax for creating a block. Now, what is a block exactly? Well, let's see it by creating home.html. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do extends base.html. And then I'm going to go ahead and create that block again. So I'm recreating block content and in block again. And I'll paste in hello FastAPI Airtable. So what's happening is home.html is opening up base.html and then substituting this block here for whatever's in this content. That's it. Really simple. And when we refresh in here, we now see that it says hello FastAPI Airtable. So that's a couple things that are kind of cool about using FastAPI. The templating stuff is Jinja. That is not FastAPI, although as we've seen, it can be used by FastAPI, but it can also be used by Flask, by Django, by many, many other Python frameworks, Python web frameworks, as well as just rendering out text documents and stuff like that. So it's simply not just for the web. But that's it for this one. And if you have any questions on Jinja, just let me know in the comments. Otherwise, let's keep going. So now what I want to do is be able to accept form data. What do I mean by form data? Well, inside of our HTML document that is in home.html, this could live in base.html too, but let's keep it nice and clean on home.html. We're going to go ahead and do input type equals to email. This means that I actually want to collect someone's email. I'm also going to give it a name of user_email just for the time being. And then I'm going to go ahead and give an input type of submit. And submit will have a value of join waitlist. Okay, and you want to have that trailing slash there. Okay, so that's a very simple way of writing a form. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and take a look at our homepage here. This is not pretty, of course, but now I have this form in here actually rendered out. Now I can also do something like this where I have a placeholder and say your email and then ... and we save that. We can also make it a required field, as in required being required. And what this will do is then if I hit join waitlist, the browser is going to be like, hey, you need to fill this out. So if I do abc@abc.com, this is potentially a real email, but don't use it, and hit join waitlist, my URL changes up here. What happened? And if I look in VS Code and actually the server running, I see that there's this get here. Okay, so these are called HTTP methods. And it actually goes back to app.py. I told you we would talk about this. This is the actual get method. The get method is that standard method. This is probably the most used method on all websites. It's when you actually go there to get something, like you are grabbing the data, right? You are trying to look at whatever's on that page, so you're requesting it and getting that data. What we are doing with this user email thing, we actually aren't trying to get that data. Instead, we are trying to send that data. So this is actually post data. Think of it like a mail, right? We are mailing this data in from this form. So we actually need to change our method to what do you think? We need to change it to post. Really simple. Notice though, when we did use the get method, it actually put in user email here. And that, of course, is directly correlated to this name here. I actually want it to just be simply email, right? So then my backend knows it's email, but you can experiment with that as much as you want. That can get confusing, right? It says type email, name email. Type email just means that the browser now knows that you need to put in an actual email here, versus if I didn't have that ABC and I just did, something like this, your browser is going to be like, hey, you need to add in the @ there. There's ways to fool that, so it's definitely not foolproof, but it is nice to know that the browser has some of those features as well as required. Cool. So now that we've got this, let's go ahead and just go back to the index page, which is just simply that, and hit enter. And now I'll do abc@abc.com, hit join waitlist, and now I get this detail method is not allowed. So the reason we're seeing this is because our project, our FastAPI project, has no way to handle the quote-unquote post method. So there's a lot of different ways on how you can think about doing this, but the easiest way by far is just by doing app.post and /. So in this case, I'll go ahead and define home signup view, and this is what I actually want to define. But the thing is, I still want the template to be a response. So I might want it to be, in some cases, I might want to actually send back JSON data, as in if you are using this as an API service, you'll probably want to send back JSON, not an actual template, because that will render out an HTML template. But in my case, I don't want to do that. I actually want to re-render out that template itself. Okay. So once we have this, we can go one step further. But before we do that, let's go ahead and resubmit this, and notice that we are now back on here, right? I submitted that data and it's gone. Okay. So how do I actually collect that data? Well, this of course is a key element of forms. Now, the way I'm going to do it is not incredibly secure because of how this form is set up. It doesn't have something called CSRF. That is a protection that we'd want to add in the future if we were using our own database. We'd probably want to do it even if we're not using our own database. In this case, for illustration purposes, I'm not going to be doing it. I'm going to make this nice and simple and leave out CSRF. So let's go ahead and put a big ol' to do in here for future and say to do add CSRF for security. Okay. Again, not going to do it for now. So how do we actually grab that form data? This is the question. So to do this, it's pretty simple. We're going to import the form class in here. We come down into our view and we take the name of the field that we want to accept in here, and we give it a data type. In this case, an email is a string. It's not going to be an integer. So email string, and this is going to be equal to a form element ... Okay. So this is just a quick and easy way to set this email and actually collect it. And now we could actually print this data out, or better yet, I could just re-render what that email is, as in submitted email, and we pass that in. Okay. So now in my home.html, I can render out that submitted email and just put it in here, just like that. So a cool thing about this is I can also use a condition and use curly brackets again, and we'll say if submitted email, then render it. If there is none, then it won't render out that entire element at all. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's go back to my homepage here, refresh it, and do abc@gmail or whatever, join waitlist, and what do you know? There is that submitted email. Okay, so I want to break things. That's how we learn. I'm going to change the name to user email, and I'm going to try it yet again. So abc@abc or whatever, boom, I get this error now. So FastAPI is an API first framework. So it's always going to be returning errors as an API. So in this case, it's returning a dictionary as an error. It's basically saying, hey, this email field is required to this data. In this case, I don't have it at all. So it's giving me this error. So this is definitely one of the downsides to rendering templates with FastAPI. But if we design it correctly, hopefully we won't run into that issue too many times. So now that I got this, I now have email in here and it's coming through. Now it's time to send email to Airtable. And honestly, if you've done the Python version of this, integrating Python with Airtable, you probably already know how to do this section. But we are going to go ahead and do it because it's actually really easy to do. Let's keep going. All right, so I know this project is going to go into production. That's the plan eventually. So that means that I want to adopt really good habits for those kinds of projects. If I'm just tinkering around, I don't necessarily need to have these same habits, but in my case, I definitely want to have them. And that is going into SRC and creating a .env file to put my sensitive keys into environment variables instead of directly in my code. So these are the keys that I want to use: Airtable base ID, Airtable API key, and Airtable table name, right? And I really want to test these things out that they are working. So the first thing I'm going to do is inside of app.py, I'll go ahead and import OS. So we're going to import OS right here, and we'll just print out os.environ.get and any of these keys, but really this one right here because it says working, and we just want to print out what that says. If I refresh in here, I can print out actually both things, maybe the actual string of what the name is and then the value, and we get none, right? So that's because it's actually not being loaded by default. And we actually already implemented a package that does load it, and that's in requirements.txt, so python-env. So to load that in, we're going to go ahead and do from .env import load.env. Simple enough. Now again, my .env file is right next to app.py inside of SRC. So now what I'm going to do is run load.env, and then I'm going to go ahead and print it after that and before. And we see that once I call this, it runs. So I do want to call it prior to any of my routes that I'm going to end up using that with. But I also want to have it cached. Like, I don't want it to be called a ton of times. So to do this, there's a really simple way, and that is by using something in functools called LRU cache. And all of that's going to do is just call that method. So I'm going to define, and we'll call this cached.env. And that's going to call that method. And then we use LRU underscore cache and call that. And now what we should get is this load.env, but unfortunately it's not. Well, that's because I actually didn't call cached.env. So I still need to call that one. It does just clean up the memory just a little bit. So I don't need to print these things out anymore, but now I actually have a very reliable way of calling and loading in my .env file for local development. Now, many of you already know that I store all of my code on GitHub. So this code for this project, all of it is on here. So part of the reason we also use a .env file is that it's not going to be sent here ever, right? It's actually part of something called a gitignore file, which means that my version control system called Git will register that and not send those things in. Just like lib and wheels and .pyc files, pip log, there's all sorts of things it just will never send in, which I think is actually really, really nice that that's a feature, because now I can actually feel pretty good about this .env and be like, okay, I don't have to worry about this stuff accidentally being sent to my Git repo. That doesn't mean that it's perfectly secure, right? So you probably don't want to have too many keys in here, and you probably still want to secure your own computer. And there's a lot of other security concerns that we can have coming out from this, but at least it's a lot better than hard coding it into your app itself. Now, as it relates to Airtable, they have one single API key, which I don't think is incredibly secure, because Now you only have one key for all API access. You need to be able to roll these things on a regular basis and not always rolling the ones that are in production. But that's just my opinion. At least for now, it works really well and we can do all sorts of cool things with it. So let's go ahead and actually do that. Now let's go ahead and integrate our FastAPI app to Airtable. So log into Airtable, and the first thing I want to do is go into my account, go into my API key, regenerate this key, copy it, and go into our env file and put in that key. Okay, so next thing I need to do is go back into Airtable, and let's go ahead and create a new base. I'm going to be starting from scratch, and I'm going to call this base FastAPI to Airtable. And notice that it's called table 1. We'll leave that for just a moment. Next, what I'm going to do is go to airtable.com/API. Of course, you could always search Airtable REST API and you'll find this as well. Let's go ahead and navigate to our first workspace and click on table 1 table. And what we'll see is if we go to create records, we'll see this curl command here. This is what we're going to be replacing on with Python. Now you actually could call curl from Python. You could do this entire command from Python. I just don't recommend it. It's not as stable and it's not going to work across platform as well as using Python requests. So what we see here is the actual URL that we'll end up using. Now, if you followed my Python to Airtable project, you'll know that I recommend that you change this. And that's because when you use a string like this, it is just a lot harder to, well, unpack for the vast majority of people, right? So table %2001, that's not what I call it at all. %201, not at all. It should be table 1. But that's not how URLs work, and that's not how this one is encoded. So what we need to do is actually change our table name. So let's go into that table and rename this thing to something different. In this case, I'll call it FastAPI to Airtable. Not a huge surprise here. Very simple table name. Now, make sure the rest of your team never touches that. In fact, they never touch any of these fields either. If they do, they're in trouble. Anyways, so now that we've got that, we've got FastAPI to Airtable. That's now our table name. The final thing is the actual base name. So if we go to this introduction here, we see the ID of this base is, there we go. So now we have the 3 critical pieces to actually integrating into Airtable. So what I'm going to do is go back into create records and I'll copy this entire curl command, and we'll come in to src and we'll make a new file called airtable.py. And I'm going to go ahead and import OS here, and I'll just paste in this command. I'm also going to import requests because we want to augment this one to being what we need it to be. Now there's 2 header keys here, so I know for a fact that I'll definitely be doing headers, and I'm going to be doing these 2 keys. So let's go ahead and cut them out and move them up. So that -h is that header, but also just getting familiar with the fact that authorization is a header most of the time. It's like very rare that it's not a header. Content type also very often is a header. So we just need to turn it into a Python dictionary versus how they have it encoded for curl. Next, of course, this is an actual endpoint. This is our URL endpoint. You can call it URL. I like calling these endpoints. Okay. And of course, this is going to be a string. Post is typically the HTTP method. $X also usually means the type of request. So we're going to go ahead and use requests.post, that endpoint, and we know headers equals to headers. I am so close to having this done, it's not even funny. Next is just this data here. So the data dictionary itself is right here. So I'll go ahead and say data equals to that. Now the reason I know this is because I'm very familiar with using JSON data. Remember, the content type is application JSON. So you'll get a lot better at reading these things yourself. And notice that it says records. So this implies that it's going to be adding multiple records at once. We don't need to add multiple, we just need to add 1. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So that's that conversion. Now, this might be repetitive to some of you, but that's okay. We now have this mostly solved. Okay. The only thing that we do actually need to solve is actually, instead of calling this data, just calling it JSON. Python requests will convert this actual data dictionary, everything that's in here, it will convert it into being a JSON dictionary. I'm going to tab this in and define push to Airtable. Okay. So all we actually need, the only field that we'll need is email. And we'll say if email is none, we're going to return false. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and come in here and say request.post. And what I want to return is r.status code equaling to 200. For Airtable, that is a successful call, whether it's create or not. 200 is what they call a success. This is just from my own testing. Maybe that changes in the future. And if, we could also say or r.status code equals to 201. These are basically those success calls that we want to see. Okay, so how do I know that I only want this field? Well, if I go back into app.py, my form only has the email field. If I had additional email or additional fields that I wanted to store, I would actually put that in here. And those fields are going to go down into the actual data we send to Airtable, right? So in this case, we want to actually name it the name of the field that we're going to have in Airtable. So whatever this field name is in Airtable, we want to put this here. Even if email is awesome is the field name, we're going to do that. In fact, let's use email is awesome and test this out to make sure this happens. And what I'm also going to do is print out r.json just so we can make sure that the data is coming through correctly and all that. Okay, so let's go back into Airtable and create this field of email is awesome. And I'm going to just replace this name here, and we will rename this field email is awesome. And I'm going to delete these other fields. We no longer need these. Now, you could probably keep these other fields in here if you want your other teammates to use them. But there's a lot of features that Airtable has that I'm just not going to cover here. So let's just leave it in as this. I also want to change the field type to simply email, and we'll go ahead and save that. You don't have to change the field type. You can leave it in as a string. That's just an optional thing that you can do, which allows Airtable to do all other kinds of integrations that, again, we are not talking about. Okay, so now that we've got this, let's go ahead and give this a shot. I'm actually going to use it inside of my application already. So in here, what we're going to do is from .airtable, we're going to import the push to Airtable. And then inside of the home signup view, the post method itself, we will actually call email being passed in here. So email equals to email. And then we'll go ahead and say did succeed or did send. Either way, did update. We'll actually use that in as a keyword argument or context variable for our template. So inside of our templates now, we can actually come in here and add in and did send. Okay, so thank you for joining with that submitted email. Okay, so that was really fast. One of the things that I totally didn't do was update this endpoint. So what we need to do is update it based off of these things. So inside of Airtable, let's go ahead and bring those in. Now, I'm actually not going to leave the actual values in. Instead, what I'll do is do something more like this and set those values. So this base ID is going to replace this right here. So let's use f string here. The table name, of course, is not any different. It's going to actually replace the table name in that value. And that's this right here. Okay, and then the API key, of course, goes in right here. So let's put in the actual API key as an environment variable. The API key is probably the most important as an environment variable. So you certainly can hard code the other ones if you don't anticipate those changing much. But I think all three of them might change from time to time. In fact, the base URL also might change. Like, notice that it says v0. Maybe they introduce v1 and that breaks all of this. So that also might be something that we add into environment variables, but it's not something I'm going to worry about right now. So at this point, this should be fully integrated into Airtable. We're basically done with the Airtable portion because their API is actually really easy to work with. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. I'll go ahead and do abc@gmail, hit join waitlist, and I didn't get the correct response. Instead, I got a not found. So we'll actually solve this in the next one. So inside of Airtable, I'm going to actually print out my endpoint here, and we'll take a look at that. And we'll go ahead and run this again. And it's not giving me the correct URL. So clearly my environment variables are not actually showing up correctly. So this actually gives us a good opportunity to improve our client or our push to Airtable. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a class called Airtable. And this class itself is going to have the base ID of the type of string, and then the API key, also a string, and then finally table name, also a string. So the reason we're doing it this way now is because this will actually be better served in the long run for us. This is kind of coming from that other Python one, but now we'll go ahead and use self here and just change these things accordingly. So this right here will be self.baseID. This will be self.API key, and then finally self.table name. And this one will just be create records now to go and fit with what we have inside of the API, the actual Airtable API. And so the last thing I want to do is import or go from data classes. We're going to import the data class decorator. And what this does is if we put it on a class itself, now I actually don't have to write an init method to set all of these things. We can just set it directly. And the only caveat is you don't want to actually set a default value on here of some kind. You just want to set it just like that. That's like probably the easiest way to get this thing going. That doesn't mean you can't set a default value. Let's just not do it. Okay, cool. So now we've got this data class here. And so let's actually use this one now in our app and move these environment variables out of Airtable itself and put it in app.py right after we actually load in those environment variables. This is where I will do this declaration. Okay, so Airtable itself, I'm going to just copy these few things here. And first off, we will add in Airtable, the actual class. And then down here, I'll go ahead and say Airtable client equals to that Airtable. And I'll initialize it with these values here. So base ID equals to the environment variable of base ID, and then so on. Now, of course, these things will not, they'd be a non-issue in production because the production environment variables would be available throughout the entire code. But the nice thing about this now is I just need to improve the client itself. So the Airtable client, now I just need to be able to improve that to where I am doing other things. So we'll go ahead and say create records. Another thing that's cool about this is I can actually pass in data in here as a dictionary. So I could say email and email, and that will now be my argument that comes into my create records, and that's going to be in here of a data class or some sort of argument that we're going to be passing. And this gives me a much more robust way of using this client. So this is a lot more closer to what you might see as a production type thing. And so all I want to do here is now say length of data.keys is equal to 0. Then we'll return false. So if you're not putting any data in there, maybe we'd raise an exception, but in this case, I'll just return false. So now we should actually see something working a lot closer to what an actual client might actually end up working like. So let's go ahead and give this a shot now, and I'll refresh in here and hit continue, and it's loading, so that might give a second. So of course, email is awesome is actually the name here. So that's actually part of the problem that we might be seeing here. If these create records should be email is awesome, and also this should be the client like that. So the actual key is email is awesome, which is probably why this is hanging. So let's try that one more time and load this up. We've got invalid syntax. Oops, we forgot a comma here. That's another problem, don't you think? Okay, so we go ahead and come in here, add it, and what do you know? So now if I change the field name to just lowercase email, I have to actually change this field name as well to whatever that is, right? So in this case, I'm calling it email, and let's go ahead and refresh in here. And this time it says thank you for joining with that email. Let's do 123 at thisisnotreal.com. Join. Look at our table. Thisisnotreal.com. Yes. Cool. So we definitely had to divert a little bit. We started off one way, but as code goes, we had to adapt a little bit, and we actually ended up making it a lot better. So let's deploy this app to the world. Let's actually host it on a production server. In this case, I'm going to be using Heroku. So there's links in the description on how to install Heroku, and that is Heroku here. And of course, this is what will come back if you're on Mac, Windows, or Linux and you have Heroku installed. You can also make sure that you have Git installed. Git is for version control to track our code. So make sure you have those things installed. If you don't, let me know in the comments and I'll point you in the right direction to get those installed. But assuming that you have all that, now what I want to do is actually define something called a Procfile. This is specifically for Heroku, but it actually is starting to be used in other places as well, like DigitalOcean. So this Procfile, actually, we can declare a process called web, and this is essentially going to call our application, which is inside of SRC. It's very similar to run, just like this. So all I'm going to do here is I'm not going to have reload, and I'm not going to have a port. I'm just going to do uviacorn source.app and then :app. That's it. Now I'm going to run Heroku local, and hopefully what happens here is this actually starts up and runs. Now I actually do need to run this in my virtual environment still. So source bin/activate, and now Heroku local. That's way Heroku has access to all of the things you installed in your virtual environment. And take a look. It looks like it's working. So if I actually type out abc123 at Gmail or whatever, I get an invalid authentication token. That's okay because I actually changed things after this video, the last video was recorded, so we will have to fix that in a minute. But for now, the actual service is running, so it's actually ready to be deployed to our application. So that's actually how we use Heroku local and creating our Procfile. We have some sort of web server runner. So uviacorn, that's what that does. It actually runs our web server. It's our application web server. Another one is called gunicorn, which actually can use uviacorn. So you can use those together. But in this case, I'm just going to be using uviacorn to keep things nice and simple and what we've already had. So that's it for the Procfile. The hardest part of this might have been setting up your Heroku and your Git if you've never done those things before. But for everyone else, we are now ready to actually push this into GitHub. Now we're going to go ahead and cover some Git basics. Now, if you know how to deploy a project to any Git repo like GitHub, Bitbucket, any of those, and continuously do so, you can probably skip this part. If you don't, let's go ahead and jump in. So now what we're going to do is deploy our project's code onto GitHub. After we do that, then we'll set up a trigger into Heroku. But before we even get here, I actually need to set up my project as, well, I'm going to do it as its own blank project, as if you were doing this from scratch. So inside of my dev folder here, I'm going to make a new folder called FastAPI Airtable private. So in there, I'm actually going to bring over the code that I for sure need. So it's a few of these things, but definitely SRC. So I'll bring that over, and definitely my scripts. I'll bring that one over, and then requirements.txt, and then of course the Procfile I just created. Brand new project, brand new folder, merely to show you the baseline of what you need to do for deploying your project, because my other project already has Git installed in here. So now that we've got this, again, you have Git in there. So if you type out Git, it actually does something. What I want to do is reinitialize my virtual environment. So Python 3.6 -m venv period. and this will download and get everything ready for me. So go ahead and do source bin/activate, and then pip install -r requirements.txt. So this is actually a low-key way to also just copy all of my code and run this on your local system as well. And I'll go ahead and upgrade pip. Okay, cool. So now that I've got this, what I want to do is initialize a Git repository. So I do git init, and this will actually create a repository, an actual folder that's going to be tracking all of my code changes. But what we see here, especially if you have Git enabled on VS Code, you'll see all of these things. But even if you aren't using VS Code, if you do git status, we see a bunch of code in here that we're probably not going to need. So to actually ignore this to GitHub, which is a really good idea, is to create something called a .gitignore file. So this gitignore file is really cool because we can put in stuff like ds store. This is something for you Mac users. If I save that in here and I run git status again, it's gone, right? So we actually want this for all sorts of Python related things. So instead of spending a bunch of time trying to figure out what all of that is, we can actually just search Python gitignore, and what this will do is give us a GitHub Python gitignore file, which is actually really, really good. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. Now notice I left ds store in here. That Python gitignore doesn't actually do that for you Mac users. So if I do git status now, I see a lot of things have been taken away. One of them that's still in there is bin. I actually don't want bin either. We don't need to deploy it on this project. Some Python projects do need it. That's why it's in there. And it looks like include is in here, but include's just an empty folder, so it doesn't actually matter anyway. So now if I do git status, this is all of my really important project code. I don't really need the virtual environment configuration, but that often is really nice to know about as well. But not every project requires it because you have requirements.txt. But at the very least, this gives me the Python version that's being used. So when you actually use Heroku, what you also want to do is just something like Python-v and put that into something called a runtime.txt file. So inside of here, we now see runtime being this. And let's just go ahead and use lowercase stuff in here, just like that. Okay, so now I've got all of my code. So if I do git status, what I want to do is I want to have GitHub know about all of these things, as in I want to add all of these files into my Git repository. So I just do git add --all and git commit. This is going to be my initial commit. So what did I do here? Git add --all means that it's ready to be tracked by GitHub. We made some changes to our files. Now it's ready to go into GitHub. Git commit -m means actually store these into GitHub and make a message called initial commit. Don't worry, we'll do this a couple times. So even if it's a little unclear right now, that is actually how we can store our first actual Git repo commit. So if I do git status now, I see that there's nothing to commit, as in no files have been changed. If I do git log, I see that the log of all of the things that I actually committed. Okay, cool. So the next thing is, what if I actually just doubled or duplicated src? So now I have src in here of src copy, and I do git status. There it is, right? So git src copy is in here. If I wanted to add that, I'd just do git add --all, git commit -message src copy. Cool. Now what if I deleted it? Okay, so let's go ahead and delete it. Move to trash. Now if I do git status, I see, these are deleted. That's actually not what I wanted to have happen. So if I do git log, I can actually revert back to an old commit, which is this one right here. So I actually grab this commit right here and do git reset that commit like hash, right? So that commit ID there basically, and then do --hard. This gives a hard commit and it brings that code back for me. How cool is that? Now, this actually just showed me on a kind of a basic level on how to actually use various parts of Git. There's a lot more to it than just this, but as you see, it's pretty easy to do. You just need to get in the habit of doing it. So one of the things I do want to do is actually revert back to my initial commit. So if I scroll down here, I've got my initial commit, and I'll do git reset that initial commit -- hard. Okay, and there we go. So that actually removes the SRC copy, and now we no longer have it in our logs at all. So there's really no way to revert back and have that SRC copy at this point, because I now went past what Git knew about it. It went back in history too far to know about that code. So that's cool. But another thing I can do is actually delete Git altogether. So if you do ls-al, you can see .git here. So we can cd into .git, and this is actually our repository itself. So this right here has all sorts of data related to our code. And again, Git can get a lot more complex than what I've covered here, but it's nice to know that there's actually an entire folder that's being covered by this. That folder is not going to be added in the same way as all your other code on a Git repo. So anyways, now that we've got this, let's go ahead and just go back into our main project here. One of the things I purposefully left out was my .env file. Notice that it was not in here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and copy my other .env file, which was in SRC actually. So let's go ahead and bring that into SRC. Uh-oh. It actually did have one in here. That's because I copied and pasted that code. But notice if I actually add it or update it and I do git status, there's nothing in there. So if I delete this stuff and save it, git status, it's not in there, right? It's not actually going to go into my Git repo. Speaking of, let's go ahead and create a private Git repo now, or a GitHub repo that is not accessible to everyone else. So we come in here and we hit private. This one I'm going to call it FastAPI Airtable private. Okay, so it's a private repo. Notice that it says add git ignore. So if you were starting with your repo, you could totally add your own git ignore file right here, and you can actually pick one that they already have for you. Of course, I skipped that step because we didn't need to do it. I just wanted to make sure you knew of it. You can add a README file. I actually would leave these empty if you've actually never worked with Git before. Now we'll go ahead and create this repository. And the cool thing is when we actually do leave it empty, when we don't have a README, a license, or git ignore, I get these instructions on how to push this into Git. One of the things I'm going to ignore is this git branch-m main. And the reason being, if we go into git log, we can see that it's actually on the master branch. This is actually changing. Maybe in the future it will not be on there, and maybe yours already says main. It's entirely possible. But notice that it says git init. We did that. Git add, and this is actually just one single file now. So that one single file is how you do it. You can just track one file and deploy just one file. I've been deploying all of the files, and git commit actually goes for that commit. And then notice that we've got this git remote add origin. This is actually the main thing that we want to grab here because we are going from an existing repository. So let's go ahead and copy this right here, and we'll paste that in. And then again, we don't want to change the branch at this point. You can, but it gets things a little bit more complicated. So instead, what I'm going to do is use git push to the origin of master. So if I do git remote -v, I can actually see all of my origins in here. So I've got origin, and then again, to get the branch, a quick way to do that is git log, and you can see what branch that we're on, and which is the master. Okay, so now I can do git push origin master and push it. Okay, so you're probably like, what the heck is a branch? What's all this stuff? Well, the thing is, with this code, like I said, it can get more complex. You can actually start to make what's called branches, which is you're working on another section of code that's not on the primary branch. It's not the main application yet, but you still want to store it with the repo. So you can actually divert these changes into what's called branches, where your master branch, that main branch that you're using for your application, is the one that we'll be working with the most, right? So as a beginner, you will be using the master branch pretty much exclusively until you start working on other features. Then you might use other branches at that point. Something you don't really need to worry about yet, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of context as to what was going on there. So if you actually refresh on your repo here, you now should see all of your code, everything that you actually need to deploy on a Git project. So to verify that it actually is private, you go here, right? So it's private, cool. Empty, private, no big deal. So now we are actually ready to deploy this from GitHub to Heroku. Okay, so this is actually a very common thing to do on all kinds of services. So DigitalOcean, you can deploy an application on DigitalOcean from a Git repo or a GitHub repo especially. Linode, there's a way to set this up as well. It's not natively supported yet, but it probably will be. Google Cloud Platform definitely supports this. AWS definitely supports this. What's cool about these two is you can actually build Docker containers as well just from your repo. You don't even need Docker locally. It's just a cool little thing to research more about if you're interested. And Python Anywhere probably has this ability. I don't actually use Python Anywhere, but a lot of people really seem to like this one a lot. It probably has this ability to deploy from your Git repo as well. And of course, Heroku does too. So if you have questions on this, let me know. Git can get really complex. So just keep this methodology in mind. Okay. So I'm going to go into Airtable here. I'm going to make just a really minor change. I'm going to delete some spaces, and I'm also going to maybe, let's see here. I'm going to get rid of this print statement right here. Cool. And now I'll do git status. I made some changes, right? So what I want to do is do git add period. The period will add everything in there. You can also just do the actual file itself. Either way. So whatever you're comfortable with. A lot of people argue that you should add the individual file itself so that you can do git commit and then minor formatting change to Airtable client. So the git commit -m, this is the message to tell you what happened here, which I'll show you in a second. And that's it. So now we've actually staged the file that's changed, and then we made a message and committed it. So we kind of finalized those changes. So we got it prepared to finalize, and then we finalized. So if I do git log, I can now see that message here, right? So this is the message for that actual commit. So it actually tells anyone else, including yourself, as to what happened with this commit, right? It's a good idea to make this, well, a little bit explicit. Like it's nice to know exactly what's going on in any given change. But again, as a beginner, don't spend too much time on this because it can get a little tedious to be like, okay, every single time I save something, do I need to actually commit it? Well, no, you don't actually have to do that. It's much more when you are ready to actually put this into production. That's when you should do the commit and give as descriptive of a message as you possibly can. But now that we've got that, we're going to go ahead and do git push origin master. Okay. So origin is just an arbitrary name that I gave it, right? So git remotes -v, or excuse me, git remote -v. What this shows me is origin in here, but I can have this as another origin as well. So I could say git remote, and we'll do add, and this time I'll call this GitHub, and then put that git repo in there, and then do git remote -v. Now I see that there's multiple, right? It's the exact same, like the actual GitHub repo or the actual repository is the same, but oftentimes you'll have many different remotes, so you can push it into many different places, right? So if you've actually worked with Heroku before, a lot of times you'll actually see a Heroku one in here as well, which is actually incredibly common. We are not going to do that. We're not going to push to Heroku at all. The only reason I have Heroku local is to just test this. So really, in theory, I don't even have to install the Heroku CLI in order for this stuff to work. Although I think it's a good idea to run Heroku local just to make sure that it at least runs locally before you deploy it, right? So that's kind of the key here for that specifically. All right, so a little bit longer of one to actually pushing to GitHub, but it was important to understand some of these fundamentals. I would imagine some of you were like, I already know all this and just skipped it, which is completely okay. But the main thing here is we now have a better understanding of how to do this. Now, if this is hard or confusing, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, let's keep going. Now we're going to go ahead and deploy our FastAPI Airtable GitHub repo onto a Heroku application. Now, if you followed me in that last section, you know that I also made a private repo, which essentially has the exact same code. But I'm going to be working off of the public repo so that any and all of us can actually fork this repo and use it on our own GitHub account. So by all means, fork the repo and then follow from there. The next thing I need to do is actually set up this repo to work correctly. First off, I have to adjust the Procfile slightly. And what I have to do is add in the host. So we go --host, and then it's 0.0.0.0. This is just the default host that we need to use on Heroku. This might change. So the other option would be, well, it would actually be documented, but it'd be 127.0.1. But we're going to be using 0.0.0. And then we want to add in a port here using the environment variable of port, or a default. In this case, I'll just say 8000. So what this will allow me to do is still run Heroku local on my machine, just like this. So if I go source bin/activate, I can actually do port, and let's do equals to 3000, and then Heroku local. This should actually give me the port of 3000 on the startup, which is that right there. Cool. So as long as that's working, we can keep going. So now that we've got that, I also have to add in another file called runtime.txt. This runtime will be our Python runtime. In this case, I'm going to be doing 3.6.12. Now this is different than the Python version I'm working with in my virtual environment, just by a minor release there. So it is still 3.6, just a more upgraded version of that. So when in doubt, you just can look up on Heroku itself for supported runtimes in Python. That would be what you would search. Now, to actually solve all of these problems, you can change it by using Docker, but that's outside the context of all of that. So now that we've got this, I'll go ahead and do git add --all, and we're going to go ahead and do git commit, and I'm going to just call this one prepare for production. And then git push origin main. In this case, I'm using the main branch, but you might be using the master branch. Either branch you use is fine. Just go ahead and do git log to see what it is, which branch that you're actually using when in doubt. Cool. So now that we've got this, I want to make sure that runtime is saved. Let's just do another git status. It looks like runtime, I didn't actually save it, so let's go ahead and add it again. And then I'll do commit and updated Python runtime. And again, git push origin main. Okay, so in the future, this is how I'm actually going to do all of my deploying, is really just adding some changes with Git and then pushing it into my GitHub repo, which will come here. So if I refresh in here, I should see a few changes, right? So like Procfile was changed a minute ago, runtime was added 19 seconds ago. That sounds about right. Cool, so now it's time to actually jump into Heroku and deploy this application. So to do this, we are using the Heroku console for this one because it just makes it a little bit easier on us, especially when connecting our GitHub repo. So let's go in here to new and create new app. This one I'm going to call FastAPI Airtable, and we'll go ahead and hit create app. Now, you notice that there's this thing called pipelines. This actually allows us for additional features when we actually deploy our application, things that can run tests. You can do all sorts of different things with your code in a pipeline. This is not something we need to do at this point, but it is cool to know about. So the next thing is the development or deployment method. Now, in other projects, I actually use Heroku Git a lot, but that actually just creates a whole nother repository for your code. And well, we really don't need to do that. Instead, what we can do is just use GitHub, which is the plan here, and we can run the connection to our GitHub repository or GitHub account by connecting to GitHub. And then, of course, we want to authorize this application. I'll go ahead and authorize it, and I'll log in here. And here we go. So now it's authorized. Simple enough. And now I just look for the repo name. In this case, it's just FastAPI Airtable. If I search this, I'll actually see two repos in my case. Notice how they're treated exactly the same. Both the public and private one look identical, and they will be treated identical. The only difference is whether or not the public has access to it. But since we just authenticated with GitHub, Heroku will have access on our behalf. I'll show you how to actually disconnect those things in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and connect this now. And what this is doing is it's going to allow us to actually see all of the deployments we want to have. Right? So we've got the app connected to GitHub. We've got automatic deploys in here. So do we want this to automatically build or deploy it when that happens? And yeah, we can do that. We can enable it right here. Before I enable it, I'm just going to go ahead and go to this manual deploy and hit deploy branch. So this should actually deploy our first application, and we'll even see it building right here. The cool thing about this is this will also show me if errors occur with my code at all. So this is often a good place to start if you've never deployed to Heroku before, is just doing these manual deploys. So if I scroll back up and go to activity, what I'll see is that same thing happening here. So we can look at that view, the build log right here for the exact same deploy. It's all of the same information. So if there is an error in the actual building of this application, this is where you'll see it. And what do I mean by building? Well, what's happening here is it's actually going to install the version of Python we need, and then it's going to install all the requirements for it for this particular project, and it's all isolated to this project, and then it finally deploys it to where it needs to go. In this case, it was actually really a pretty small application, and it is now deployed. So if I open up this application, I should see something like this. Now, if you don't, well, there's the chance that you can go and take a look at your logs. Now for this, I actually go back into my local project and do Heroku and Heroku logs, and then -a, and then the app name. So in my case, the app name is FastAPI-Airtable, and I can hit enter here. This will actually show me the logs that you might have issue with, right? So perhaps you didn't set the port correctly. Perhaps you didn't set the host correctly. Those are the most common things that happen when deploying to Heroku for FastAPI. There are other things that could happen too, like incorrect code, right? So if I just, I don't know, wrote something like break or raise nothing, right? So that's invalid syntax code. So what I can do here is actually take a look at that. So you git status, git add, git commit, and I'll go ahead and say invalid code. And then I'll just go ahead and do git push origin main. Okay, so remember, Heroku doesn't have automatic deployments right now, so I'm actually going to go ahead and turn on automatic deployments. But now that I've actually pushed this code, the automatic deployment is not going to run. It will run from here on out, so the next time I push this code. But I'm going to deploy this branch, and we're going to take a look at the error that's going to happen. So what may happen is it actually may break in the build process. But more than likely, it will not break in the build process, but rather it will require us to use our logs to kind of diagnose what's going on. But while that's building, there's something else that we need to consider, and that is our environment variables. So if you go into settings here and go to config vars, you can reveal there are no environment variables yet. So we definitely need to set that up. But before I get there, let's go ahead and see if the build has finished. It's just about done. It looks like it's done. Okay, so now if I refresh in here, I should actually get some sort of error, right? It's actually hanging quite a bit. And that's because of the fact that I put invalid code on here. So if I take a look at the logs now, hopefully I'll see that, break is an invalid syntax and all that, and even raising this error, that's also an invalid thing. So there's a couple ways on how I could solve this. First off, I could just remove that and add it as a new git change, or I could go into the log and just revert back to a commit that has been working. I'm going to go ahead and do git reset to that commit version, and I'll do a hard reset here. And now I got git status. Now I'm going to need to push that into the repo. I'll do that in a second. But another thing that you can do for your project itself is you can actually roll back the releases. So in the your actual local development, you can do Heroku rollback and then pass in the app, which is FastAPI-Airtable, and we can hit enter. And this will actually roll back the release, which means that if I refresh in here, this should actually be running again because I actually went back to a different release. So this is also cool because we can actually do Heroku releases, and we'll see all of the, oops, we need to pass in the app in this case. This will actually show me all of the different releases that have been done on this particular app, right? So I am now actually behind with this app though. So I'm gonna go ahead and do git push origin main and hit enter. But now I get this error, right? Now the reason I'm getting this error is because I did a reset. So this is something that once you get a little bit more advanced with Git, you will be able to solve this in a different way. But all I'm gonna do is just do -- force, and that's going to change the repo to what I wanted it to be. So at this point, we should actually be able to go back into our Heroku project, go into activity, and we should actually see a new version potentially come out. Or should we? Well, part of the thing is that the version that I just deployed was the most recent successful deployment. So I actually don't have a new version that I'm deploying because of that git log, right? So when I actually did have a successful deployment, it was this git commit. So Heroku is not necessarily going to automatically rebuild those things if it's already done a commit, right? So if you actually want to trigger it, you totally can. But what we need to do now is actually add in our environment variables for this particular project as a way to finish this off. So if we go into this .env file, I can go to Airtable base ID, and I'll go ahead and copy these things in. So that's one way on how you can set it. Another way is by doing Heroku config set, and then whatever we want to set, so I can actually copy that directly, and then pass in -a, and it's again FastAPI Airtable, and hit enter, and that will actually set that for me as well. So the last one, of course, would be the actual table name too. Okay, so Heroku config :set that name -a FastAPI Airtable. Cool. So a couple different ways on how we can solve a number of problems that will likely come up on deploying to Heroku. Now, if this seems complicated, don't worry. You will definitely get used to deploying on Heroku and the things that we need to do. So just to summarize, what we did here is, number one, we made sure our GitHub repo or whatever Git repo that we're using is up to date and ready to be deployed to Heroku with the Procfile and the runtime. Obviously, we also need to have the requirements.txt file in here and all of our code that will actually be running. Once we did that, we actually hooked that into our Heroku project. We hooked up GitHub into there, and then we actually selected the actual code that we wanted to deploy from, right? So that's what this is right here, right? Once we had that, then we just set up our deployment schedule, essentially, or how we want this to be deployed, which in our case is automatic deployments. And then in our settings, we just added additional configuration that we might need, which of course was all of these keys here. So what I'm not sure is, or what we should be doing, is actually changing our Airtable API key. I'm going to go ahead and roll that key just to show you what you would have to do for the rolling process. We'll regenerate this key. So yes, regenerate. I'm going to go ahead and copy this one. We're going to go into our project here and changing the API key, not something else, just in case you accidentally did something else. We're going to go ahead and save that. And now for the main test, I'm going to go ahead and do Heroku app at notreal.com. Oops. I think the reset went a little bit slower than expected, but Heroku app at notreal.com. I'm going to go ahead and try this as an email that I can submit. Looks like it's submitted. Notice it's on a live production application. And if I go onto Airtable, into my Airtable, I should now be able to see that one. And sure enough, I am. So if I do it again, I should see it again, right? And there it is. Sure enough, this is now working. So it's actually deployed. It's in production. We can now start capturing data. So again, I want to do one last final recap of all of this, everything that you're going to be doing every time you make some changes. So I'm going to make this homepage look better, or at least look a little bit closer to what I mentioned at the very beginning of all this. So on my homepage here, I'm going to go ahead and add in a div class of column MD6, and I'll do MX Auto. And what this should do is actually bring everything in, and this is all from Bootstrap itself. So the actual CSS classes that we used. So we'll do scripts/run.sh. So I want to run this locally. So there we go. So now it's in there right in the middle. The actual input itself, I'll give it a class of form-control. This should give me a more robust form there. And then I'll go ahead and do text-center py5. All right, so now it's giving me a little bit more for that. Class, we'll go ahead and give it a btn and btn primary. And then I'll give it a margin top of 5, maybe a margin top of 2 or 3. There, that looks a little bit better. And then for my base.html, I'm going to go ahead and just give this a class. And we'll give it a bg of dark and text light. Take a refresh and notice that my H1 is still not exactly light. Maybe I spelled that incorrectly. Sure enough, I did. Okay, so there we go. We've got that. I'm actually going to wrap a little bit more padding in here. So I'm going to go ahead and make another div and class being py5, my5. Again, I'm not trying to spend too much time on how it's styled. I just wanted it to look a little bit closer to what we had there. Okay, so we made a bunch of changes, and now, since we made those changes, let's go ahead and send them into our repo. So I'll go ahead and do git status, and I'll do git add period, and then git commit, updated landing page UI, and then git push origin main. Okay, so I updated the landing page user interface. So now my actual final production one should be a little bit different. If we look on our activity in the Heroku application itself, the build process has just commenced, and it won't take very long, right? Because I actually don't have that many dependencies on this. So what I want to do now is go back in here. Once it's done, it should actually finish. So with that, I can also say that it's really easy to add in your own domains. And if you upgrade to a $7 a month account, you can have not only your own domain, but your own domain that has HTTPS activated by default. So I wish Heroku would sponsor my content. They never have, but they make a great product, so it's worth checking out. And there you go. Here is our Hello FastAPI Airtable. We now have a production application that you can deploy right now. Obviously, there's a lot of things we could still adjust about this to make it look cooler and it'll be a little bit more functional, but we have that full-on integration now completely in production. It's pretty cool. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you got a lot out of this one. So now you have the tools to deploy a FastAPI project, one, but then also one that you don't have to really worry about the database because you've got Airtable. So this combination I think is really, really great, and it's something worth exploring. Now, is this going to be your end-all production application that's going to serve thousands upon thousands of users? Probably not. But what it could do is actually get your project going so that when you do want to dive deeper into FastAPI or Airtable or other more production-grade databases, you totally can. And to me, that's like one of the critical things is just to get some momentum going for your project. So hopefully this was achievable enough to make that happen. Now, of course, I'm always trying to improve myself. So let me know in the comments if there's something that you would have loved to see me do or slow down on or explain in more depth. Let me know because I would love to hear your thoughts. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.